In this episode, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Usually I give a reading summary and analysis of a poem, but I don't explicitly talk about how to write about said poem. So today I'm breaking down my 5 first steps when I need to write about a poem. The poem we're going to be using is Shall I Forget You Presently, My Dear by Edna St. Vincent Millay. Step number 1, multiple readings. Poems are condensed language, and when you read them multiple times, you dilute that language to a point where you can better understand that. That is so crucial. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm only going to read the poem once, but trust me, before I came up with the things I'm going to talk about after that, I've read it like 30 times. You don't necessarily need to do that, but certainly read it a couple times and at least once read it out loud because you'll notice some things in it. Here's the poem. I shall forget you presently, my dear, so make the most of this, your little day, your little month, your little half a year, ere I forget, or die, or move away, and we are done forever. By and by I shall forget you, as I said, but now, if you entreat me with your loveliest lie, I will protest you with my favorite vow. I would indeed that love were longer lived, and vows were not so brittle as they are, but so it is. And nature is contrived to struggle on without a break thus far. Whether or not we find what we are seeking is idle, biologically speaking. So a great poem, but it's not necessarily an easy poem by any means. So what do we do after we've read the poem a few times? We have an idea of what it's talking about. We have to dive into the details of the poem because that's what makes a great paper. Step 2, know every word of the poem. Poets pick words intentionally, so you need to make sure you understand those words. And this poem doesn't have a lot of old language in it, but there's a couple things that might be worth looking up. It could be as simple as ere means before. It just fits with Millay's meter better, and it sounds pretty fancy, right? There's some other words that are a little bit trickier, though. Contrived, here we mean deliberately creating. So nature has deliberately struggled on without a break thus far, meaning everyone dies eventually. Idle can mean a lot of things, right? Your car idles, but here it means worthless, and it fits her meter again quite well. And then I would say those two almost top of the middle words, entreat and protest, that little parallel there, are incredibly important. She says, or the speaker says, to the person, if you entreat me, if you plead with me your loveliest lie, which I would say is, I will love you forever. We say that all the time. I will protest. I will make a declaration or affirmation of you with my favorite binding promise, my favorite vow, which is I will love you forever too. But this is a protest, and protest has a negative connotation to it, or at least it's against something, not necessarily negative, but it's against something. And it seems like she's saying this protest is against nature because nature is going to continue to take life, give life, and take life. Such an interesting poem. So where do we go from here once we know all the words of the poem and we get what it means? We have to dive into the music. And this, I said, listen to the music of the poem because a lot of this comes from hearing the poem read out loud. So this might be looking at the form. You'll notice this poem is 14 lines. It has a specific rhyme scheme. It's an iambic pentameter. I shall forget you presently, my dear. And it ends in a couplet. I did mark out the iambic pentameter of that last line because is idle biologically speaking is an awesome line. I mean, biologically in a poem fitting to iambic pentameter, that's pretty impressive. So because it ends in a couplet though, this poem is a Shakespearean sonnet, and that tells us a lot about the poem. We can pay attention to the rhyme, we can pay attention to the meter. If she were to break that rhyme or that meter, it would make sense. And of course, the volta or the shift in a poem or of a sonnet usually comes in the couplet, at least a Shakespearean sonnet. So we want to pay particular attention to those last 2 lines. So where do we go from here? Step number 4, ask questions of the poem. So what sort of questions are you going to ask? Well, you could ask, why is the poem a sonnet? Simple as that. Any poem that's a sonnet, you should ask yourself, why is it a sonnet? Because that poet has made a particular decision about that. And here I would say, the sonnet is a traditional love poem. Not always. It can talk about other things, including death, and this sonnet talks about both, so that's quite interesting. Also, what role does nature play in the poem? You see, nature is the focus of the end of the poem. that nature is going to destroy this love. It's the last 4 lines are all devoted toward nature. And nature is a very popular muse for poets, so it's always worth looking into. How about, what's the relationship between time and memory? I shall forget you, right? Your little day, your little month, your little half a year, right? There's all sorts of ideas of memory and how time moves us on, and we can reflect on this in our own lives as well. As we grow older, how things in the past sort of change because our memories are not perfect, and the speaker is very willing to admit that. And finally, is the poem more romantic or cynical? Is this a love poem, or is this a sad poem, or can it be both? So when you've answered these questions and walked through and supported these answers with the text, you're ready for the final step. But I would stress you need to question the poem before you do any of that. Why is it using this meter? Why is it using this rhyme scheme? Why is it a sonnet? Why is it 2 stanzas? Why is it short? Why doesn't it rhyme? Right? When you can do that, you're ready for step number 5 once you answer them, which is look for patterns. I've mentioned a lot in this video, so how can we put it all together? Well, a working thesis might be Millay creates a realistic love poem by subverting tradition. Subverting means undermining or kind of flipping on its head. So she takes the traditional love poem and she subverts it. The poems that say, I will love you forever, instead it's, I'm going to forget you. But it's still a love poem because it's realistic. But you can't just have a thesis, you have to be able to support it. And that's where your topic sentences come in. So I thought the sonnet's connection to romance could be an interesting topic sentence. As I said earlier, sonnet, traditionally romantic type of poem. And here it's like an anti-romance, but it still is a romance. So there's some interesting things with using a sonnet. You could talk about, rather than facilitating love, nature conspires against it. You know, Robert Burns famously said, my love is like a red, red rose. We often turn to nature to describe our love. Whereas here, Millay is saying that nature is going to destroy this love. And then finally, the speaker seems to be attracted to the fragility of love. There's an excitement in it. I think it was David Foster Wallace famously said, every love story is a ghost story. And maybe one of the reasons why we love so strong in life is because we know it won't last forever. We can't take it for granted. We feel sad about things that haven't even ended because we know that love isn't going to last forever. And this poem certainly expresses that, but it's in a beautiful way. So I hope those 5 steps can apply to whatever poem you're looking at. I want to offer you a little bit of bonus content here, which is, I find this poem super interesting in relation to Millay's most famous poem, which is an earlier video that I talked about, what lips my lips have kissed and where and why. There it is, took me a second to remember. Shall forget this poem, my dear. No, what lips my lips have kissed and where and why is a great poem by Millay, and it's in my mind, it's almost a follow-up to this poem, like maybe the same speaker, but decades later. But that's just a working theory of mine. If you want to hear more about that poem, you can click on that video. If you want to learn more about the Shakespearean sonnet that Millay is using in this poem, you can click on a video about the man whom that sonnet is named after and who some say did it the best. What my mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this helped you. Please drop any questions in the comments and I'll get back to them as soon as possible. Good luck with your writing. Read those poems, look for those patterns, read them out loud. You've got this. You can do it. Best wishes. Good luck. All that stuff. Have a good one. Bye.